D-Rock Irish is asking Clemson's toughest regular season game this year coming up. What do you think, Jason?
Oh, it's Georgia, man, no doubt. I think Clemson's schedule once you get past Georgia, there's not a lot there's not a lot of meat on the bone, man. You know, Clemson fans don't like it when you talk about their schedule, but the fact is Clemson is just pulled so far ahead of all these other ACC teams, man. It makes for a boring regular season most of the time. I thought it was a little bit different last year with the COVID season and Notre Dame playing Clemson twice, but the last few years, man, that Clemson's regular season, especially their home schedule, has not been very good, with Florida State falling so far down and even North Carolina State falling off, and Louisville's not taking, those steps like I expected they would under Satterfield. The Atlantic's it's not as good as it was 3-4 years ago. To me, it might even be worse than the Coastal now, for a long time it was much better than the Coastal. Clemson's just so far ahead of everybody else. It just makes for a weak schedule. There ain't no other way to say it. Once you get past Georgia, there just ain't much meat on the bone when it comes to that schedule.
Yeah, that offensive line better toughen up, because that particular team is gonna that Georgia defense is amazing. And as far as toughest game outside of Georgia, I kind of agree with you. You just don't know what you're gonna get all these other teams. The NC States aren't gonna push themselves early. They probably play a weak schedule. But I think they have a lot of guys coming back they can build up on. Like you said, Boston College, maybe. I think that's in Clemson this year. Florida State, they got a transfer guy in, and we'll see what they do. But I think they lost a lot of people on their defense.
I think Clemson's going to blow Florida State's doors off. Dabo Swinney is not going to forget the way they canceled on him after they got to Tallahassee. He was not happy about that. And those are the kind of things Dabo Swinney does not forget. I think Clemson's going to blow their doors off.
The way the schedule stacks up right now, unless things change, Georgia is going to be the only ranked team, at least heading into the season. Now, obviously, teams will rise up and play a little bit better, possibly. But Georgia is going to be the one team that, when the preseason top 25 comes out, is going to be the only team on the schedule that's going to be ranked in the top 25. South Carolina's down, as you guys mentioned. Louisville, Florida State, North Carolina State. I don't expect any of those teams to be ranked. And I think Jason pretty much set it up pretty well in regards to what's happened to the Atlantic Division over the last 5 years, led by Florida State. Has there been a program that's dropped off more than Florida State since 2016? No, not in the country. So it's certainly nothing. I know Dabo Swinney has to answer these questions all the time, and he defends the conference as being a strong conference because that's what all coaches do. They're going to defend the conference. But bottom line, he also, when he's pushed into a corner, basically says, we play the schedule we have. I really can't defend the conference. It's
exactly.
I'm coaching this football team. Everybody else is responsible, these coaches, for their teams.
And see, my problem is, if we go back to the 80s, was people saying the same thing about Florida State? I mean, outside of maybe Virginia every now and then, I mean, who did they play in the 90s? I mean, Clemson has started going down. Maybe I can't really think anybody else. I mean, it's not your job to build those teams. I mean, we had these conversations all the time. It's up to those particular programs to build their own teams up. I mean, if we talk to any other fan bases, like when I heard y'all talk about Miami a couple of days ago, that 2001 team and how their schedule was, it wasn't their fault. I mean, you play who you play.
And with Clemson, when you schedule 2 out-of-conference games against SEC teams, well, who else does that? So they do about as much as they possibly can. In the one game they're going to play, it's a rivalry game, just is going to be played forever. It's for the Palmetto State. It's tradition. It's going to be played. And then when you stack up a Georgia on top of a South Carolina, which has been anything from a 4-win team to an 11-win team over the last decade, you don't know what you're going to get out of South Carolina from year to year. They're in a slump right now, and they are going to probably need a couple of years to dig out of it. So they're not going to be competitive at that level for a couple of years. And then you look at the non-division schedule, which you always match up as your rivalry game against Georgia Tech. They haven't been real good recently. And then the round robin comes up on Pitt. That's a game at Heinz Field on October 23rd. Pitt's going to be Pitt. They're going to be Pitt. They're going to be 7-5.
I was going to say the same thing. 7-5.
That's who they are.
7-5, no doubt.
You know, again, you can't defend it. You know, you play who you play. I mean, you know, my arguments about history back in the day, Mark. You know, I mean, you can't blame Alabama because African Americans didn't play in the Southeast Conference back in the 60s and 50s. You know, I mean, they would have. You know, you can't blame them. I mean, it's just what it is.
I think Clemson does, you know, as much as they can to make sure their schedule out of conference is as strong as possible. I know they still play the AA team every year. They're going to play one of those small in-state schools every year, and then they play a group of 5 team. But those other 2 games, almost every year, they're going to play South Carolina and then another SEC team. And if it's not an SEC team, it's going to be Notre Dame. There's not a lot of other teams across the country scheduling 2 SEC teams out of conference every year. If there is, there's not many. I think Clemson schedules out of conference probably as aggressively as anybody. And just because the ACC is down and even down a little bit further than it generally is, it's a little unfair to say, hey, you should be scheduling it even tougher than everybody else is just because your conference is down. I mean, it's not, like you said, it's not their fault that they have lapped everybody and other teams can't keep, other programs haven't been able to keep up.
Well, you basically have those ACC SEC matchups: Kentucky, Louisville, Florida State, Clemson, South Carolina, Georgia Tech. And so for those teams, they can't control. So they're playing a rivalry game that everybody wants to see continue every year, regardless of how good the teams are. I think everybody can agree that we want to see Kentucky and Louisville play every year. And we want to see those 4 games that I just lined up. Well, then, as Jason said, Clemson goes out and they can't control South Carolina. South Carolina is going to be whatever they are. And that's typically not, over the course of history, not very good. Over the course of the last 20 or 25 years, it's been a lot of 7-5s. And then for the course of about 3 or 4 years, they were really good under Steve Spurrier near the end of his run. But generally, South Carolina is going to be a 6 or 7 win team, and that's who you're going to get. And then they're going out there and they're scheduling Auburn home and home, Texas A&M home and home, Georgia home and home. It doesn't get much more difficult than that, going out and scheduling that game on top of another SEC team that's typically, a decent bowl team.
Yeah, I think they got 3 more games with Georgia coming up in the next couple of decades, a home and home at LSU, a home and home at Oklahoma. They go and then they play Notre Dame several times between now and like 2036 or something like that. But yeah, they schedule aggressively out of conference, as aggressively as, they can, in my opinion, anyways. Anything more than that is just a little over the top because nobody else is doing it.
If you look at Southern Cal, they're killing themselves by scheduling Notre Dame, Alabama, and whoever else. I know they used to do it back in the day, but everybody's on TV now. I mean, I don't think Nebraska, back when I was coming up, when they were ruling the rules, I don't think they schedule hard schedules. I mean,
DeAndre, you know how big I am on scheduling.
Yeah.
Talking about scheduling and what we need to do with scheduling. So I have revamped and put together my scheduling formula. But as part of that, just underline what you were talking about, I went back to 1997. Baylor has not scheduled a ranked team out of conference since 1997. 0. And if you look at Baylor's schedule from year to year, I'll pick on Baylor because I love picking on them. And if they want me to stop, then they need to start scheduling somebody decent out of the conference. But it's like Sam Houston State, Lamar, Rice every year. So I just grabbed a team, and you brought up USC, DeAndre, and I don't know if USC would be at the top of this list, but I knew that they would be close to the top of this list. So while I see where Baylor has not scheduled a non-conference game against a ranked opponent since 1997, I counted up how many times USC is playing a ranked opponent during that time. 24 times they have played a ranked opponent in non-conference play. So that's over one per year. Yeah, they're playing Notre Dame every year. And then they're scheduling Alabama. They've had Alabama twice in the last 5 years. Well, they should have played them this last year. They didn't because of COVID. Home and homes against Ohio State and Auburn and Arkansas and on, in addition to playing Notre Dame every year. So college football scheduling is just messed up and needs to be addressed. But as far as Dabo Swinney and Clemson, they can't control the conference. They can't control the South Carolina game. That's going to get played. It's a rivalry game. They can only go out and schedule somebody like Texas A&M, Auburn, or Georgia, and that's about as tough as it gets.